Hello everyone and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and this one has become beloved by you all watching for its significance in the history of my show. It's one of my favorite segments to do, the weekly shadow report, the wide receiver cornerback matchups that I believe will define fantasy this week. And all of these matchups that I've compiled have been seen before, haven't been seen before, but most importantly, as Shepy's sweet spot says, so funny that the usual suspects are tight end around the picture: Kelsey, Kittle, and Andrews. I agree with that because you just don't know. You just don't know which tight ends will step up. A lot of the young crop of guys is starting to get more attention, and you know, as the season goes on, who knows? Maybe Kelsey, Kittle, and Andrews will become more important. Obviously, injuries are hitting some of their respective teams, but you will have to see. But then we have another comment here from SJMP. Welcome to the show, my man. Hope everything is well with you. And he was just offered a trade. He says, Jaden Daniels, Travis Etienne, I believe. That's a very interesting way to spell it. Bucky Irving for C.J. Stroud, Kenneth Walker, and Jaleel McLaughlin. Who wins this trade? I think the guy who gets Jaden Daniels, Etienne, and Bucky Irving wins this trade actually by a country mile. As he also says, the rest of my lineup is Breece Ayuk, McLaurin, Jalen Tolbert, George Kittle, Tampa kicker, Denver defense. My bench is Alexander Madison, Rashad White, Devontae Adams, Christian Kirk, and Zach Ertz. I am the Jaden Daniels team. I would not accept this trade then if you are the one trading away Jaden Daniels, because this guy, yes, and I understand, you know, this matchup specifically is not one that you favor. But if you are in a 2 QB league or you have a guy on your bench you trust for this week, then just bench Daniels, and going forward he's going to have a much easier slate. But you can't trade him away. As much as I love C.J. Stroud and I love that fact that he has so much upside as a fantasy QB and adds a lot of value, he's not worth it. And then it gets kind of interesting because I love Kenneth Walker, especially as a fantasy running back. But the value of both Etienne and Bucky Irving far outweighs, you know, Kenneth Walker and then a non-entity in the fantasy world, and Jaleel McLaughlin, who's been really disappointing, if you want my opinion on him. So I like the balance of what you have with Jaden Daniels, Etienne, and Bucky Irving. And then when I look at your bench, you have a lot of solid options there as well. As in Madison, he's not a bad option. White as well. When I look at the layout of your team, I feel like you just need to supplement a guy like Breece Hall at the running back position with more depth. And then you are set at the wide receiver position as far as I'm concerned. So overall, I would keep every single one of those players. But if there's a chance, you know, that one of your running backs falters, then maybe you can find a more even trade where you can still get a Kenneth Walker, because he is a difference maker. And not for nothing, as much as I like the fact that you have a very deep running back room, there are weaknesses there as well. So you may want to revisit this trade in the future, but for now, there's just too much value in a guy like Jaden Daniels and a guy in Bucky Irving, who's perhaps one of the better backups in the league, to let them go immediately. But thank you for your comments, and good luck to you, my friend, in your fantasy football exploits. But to close out today's show, I do want to get into my weekly shadow report with the 4 matchups. Or actually, do I have 5? I only have 4 for this week in my weekly shadow report. The first one is Jamar Chase and Deontay Banks. And I believe this is the first time both of them are facing each other, because this is an interconference game between the Bengals and the Giants, and it could be a weird one. And this matchup will define it, because we look at who Deontay Banks has faced already this season. He just clamped up DK Metcalf. He's had matchups against Justin Jefferson. I believe he's had matchups already with, who else did the Giants play? CeeDee Lamb. He's already faced a gauntlet of fantastic wide receivers. And not for nothing, yes, the Bengals offense is the unit that I'm least worried about on that team. But the Giants' defense looked very impressive in terms of their pass rush and how their coverage was sticky. And Deontay Banks is a big part of that. if Deontay Banks can hold up in coverage against these guys, then the Giants' defense is just better for it. But Jamar Chase is going to be an interesting test because he's going to get a lot of targets for this team. So look out for this matchup. It's first one in this kind of rivalry, but it's one that I kind of feel is very evenly balanced, depending on, how the Bengals offense approaches this Giants defense so that it doesn't necessarily get quote-unquote upset in this game, because it's going to be a weird one. But it's up to your interpretation here. And then the next one is Garrett Wilson versus Christian Benford. This is one we have seen before, and we will see throughout this year. But it just got a lot weirder with the circumstances surrounding the Jets, and whether or not, Garrett Wilson actually is your wide receiver one going forward. Because he's really struggled this season. He's only had, I believe, only one 100-yard game. And he doesn't seem like he's really meshing well with Aaron Rodgers, even when Aaron Rodgers is trying to force the issue there. And so, if the Davante Adams rumors are true, and Davante Adams ends up in, New York, then Garrett Wilson loses a lot of value. And then, on the other side of things, Christian Benford, not for nothing, has been part of a Bills secondary that has completely exceeded expectations. Yes, these past couple of weeks they kind of got rocked a little bit, but that's due to other injuries surrounding this defense. And Christian Benford, though, has been one of the most admirable players for them and one of the most integral parts of why, they're not completely falling to pieces. But this matchup certainly feels like it could have been bolstered, had Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson gotten that connection right straight out of the gate. But right now it feels like this matchup is a little bit uneven in terms of where these two players stand. But it's still a divisional contest, and who knows? Maybe Saleh was the problem all along. And maybe, getting that kind of, whatever kind of toxicity was there out of there was a good thing, or will be a good thing for this Jets offense. But until we see it play out in the field, in a game that really has new stakes now, is going to be something to monitor for everyone involved. But it's still perhaps the most fascinating wide receiver cornerback matchup of the week because of this game's importance and significance. As we get another one from T-Money, long time no see, my man. 10-man PPR, Burrow, Jacobs, Gibbs, CeeDee Lamb, Chase, Kincaid, DK, Wicks, Bucky Irving, Tyrone Tracy, Josh Downs, Jacoby Myers, Worthy, Brooks on IR, 3 and 2, trade Kincaid for Laporta. Now, we've seen many trades, especially at the tight end position, much like this, where people are placing a lot of stock in this younger generation. And I really like both of these guys a lot. And I feel like if you were to trade one for the other, I don't really know whether or not you would get more value from a guy like Laporta, because both of the Bills and Lions offense rely on these two guys a lot more than we think. So, depending on week and matchup, potentially trading Kincaid for Laporta is interesting, and it won't necessarily hurt you. But, my question is, why would you go out and get a guy who's super similar and try and trade him for another guy who's just as similar? And I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad trade, but I'm certainly skeptical of what Laporta could add to this team in terms of value, because it's a solid team from top to bottom. And you have a lot of stacks, you have a lot of interesting players, and a lot of depth at different positions. So I would stand pat here. I would say if Kincaid is a worry, it should be a very minimal one, because week by week he could be the difference, but he can't hurt you, is what I'm saying. He's not going to hurt you by being on your team or Laporta being on your team. Neither of them is going to hurt or hinder your team going forward. So I don't see how much of a difference trading Kincaid for Laporta would make because of how similar they are in terms of how they're going to play out each week. That's just my advice. Good luck to whatever you decide to do in your trade and in your fantasy football league. And the final one I kind of want to highlight is, one that I was kind of second-guessing myself about, but now know the injury thing. This one is a very interesting one. Terry McLaurin and Marlon Humphrey. Now, I don't think this game will be decided necessarily by the Commanders' offense, but it is kind of contingent on how much they'll do with a little, because I don't necessarily think the Commanders are going to win the time of possession battle in this one. So Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin's connection is going to have to be on from the start, because if not, they're not going to score points in the way you have to against a Baltimore Ravens team. And I feel like Terry McLaurin is going to be a very interesting X factor in this game, because you have to weigh the opportunities you're going to find in this game. Do you find the matchups you want and get Terry McLaurin going deep? Or do you kind of accept the fact that you need to kind of keep Jaden Daniels in the short to intermediate, mistake-free football kind of area? Because that's what you might have to do against a Ravens defense who takes no prisoners. So that's why I think this matchup is going to be very important. And maybe not one where Terry McLaurin wins outright, but he still might get one over on Humphrey in this matchup. But let me know what you think in the comments. But that will just about do it for today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. I've been Chris Shepard. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And before we go, I do want to remind you yet again to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show on the network, as a great appreciated thing to do for the network as well. But also keep in mind about super chats, super thanks, and super stickers features. They're a great way. As Team Money, I'll take your last comment. Okay, what about trying DK, Kincaid, and Downs for Devontae Smith and Kelsey? That was an interesting one. And I think that, you can't accept that once they come back healthy, as we're changing Downs to Worthy. I think that could be accepted, because I think that Devontae Smith will elevate this Eagles offense once he comes back, and Kelsey will get going. I know it sounds cliche, as I've kind of put down the notion that Kelsey is going to be a star tight end over the past couple of weeks, but I still think Kelsey is going to be important going forward. So that's a trade you could kind of justify, you know what I mean? But we do have to end today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. Remember, super chat, super thanks, super sticker features to contribute and interact with the show. Like, follow, and subscribe. But other than that, thank you all. I'm Chris Shepard, and I am out.